What did people wear under their clothes 2,000 years ago? Did ancient people have underwear like we do today? And why did humans even decide that they needed another layer of clothing under their clothes? Today, underwear is something almost everyone wears, but we rarely think about its history. We put it on every morning, usually without giving it a second thought, but the story of underwear is surprisingly old, and it tells us a lot about how humans have changed. It is a story about comfort, protection, hygiene, fashion, social class, and even technology. The underwear we know today did not appear suddenly. It developed slowly over thousands of years, as people changed the way they lived, worked, traveled, and dressed. Thousands of years ago, clothing was very different from what we wear today. In many ancient societies, people used simple pieces of fabric to cover their bodies. They did not have modern underwear, but that does not mean they wore nothing underneath their clothes. In ancient Egypt, for example, people wore simple linen garments around the body. Linen was useful because it was light and comfortable in a hot climate. Some people wore simple cloth coverings under or instead of their outer clothing. Clothing was also strongly connected to social class. Wealthy people could afford better materials and more carefully made garments, while ordinary workers usually wore simpler clothing. So, even in the ancient world, what people wore could tell others something about who they were. In ancient Rome, people also used simple garments underneath their outer clothing. Roman men sometimes wore a piece of cloth called a subligaculum. It was a simple garment that could provide coverage and support during everyday activities. Roman women also used different kinds of garments beneath their clothing, but the idea was not exactly the same as modern underwear. People did not necessarily wear it for the same reasons we do today. Clothing was designed according to the culture, climate, work, and expectations of the society. For many people, the most important thing was simply having something practical to wear. As centuries passed, clothing became more complicated. During the Middle Ages in Europe, people commonly wore a basic layer close to the body before putting on their outer clothes. This inner layer could help protect the more expensive outer garments from sweat and dirt. Remember, people did not have washing machines, modern detergents, or large wardrobes filled with dozens of shirts. Clothing could be expensive and difficult to clean. A simple layer underneath could therefore be very useful. It could be washed more easily than a heavy outer garment, helping people keep their clothes cleaner. This is one of the most interesting reasons underwear became important. It was not only about privacy, it was also about protecting clothing. Imagine owning only a few expensive pieces of clothing. You would not want sweat and dirt to quickly damage them. A simple shirt worn underneath could absorb some of that dirt and moisture. In this way, underwear became a practical barrier between the human body and the outer clothes. During the Renaissance and later centuries, clothing became even more complicated, especially among wealthy Europeans. Fashion could involve many layers, special fabrics, tight shapes, and carefully designed garments. Underneath these clothes, people sometimes wore shirts and other inner garments. For women, the clothing underneath could help shape the body according to the fashion of the time. For men, shirts and other layers could provide comfort and protection. The idea of underwear was slowly becoming more connected with appearance, body shape, and fashion. But there was an important difference between underwear in the past and underwear today. For many centuries, underwear was often much more visible than we might imagine. A shirt worn under a jacket or dress could be seen at the neck, sleeves, or other parts of the clothing. People did not always think of underwear as something completely private. In fact, some undergarments were beautifully made and could show a person's wealth. Fine fabric, embroidery, and decoration could tell people that someone belonged to a higher social class. Then came one of the biggest changes in the history of clothing, the Industrial Revolution. Machines changed the way fabric and clothing were produced. Clothes could be made faster and in larger quantities. Cotton became increasingly important, and mass production slowly made clothing more affordable. This changed underwear too. Instead of every garment being made by hand, factories could produce large numbers of similar garments. Underwear gradually became something that more ordinary people could own and wear regularly. The 19th century also brought new ideas about cleanliness and hygiene. As people learned more about germs, disease, and personal cleanliness, washing the body and clothing became increasingly important. Underwear played a useful role because it was the layer closest to the skin. Clean inner clothing could help people feel fresher and could protect outer clothing from direct contact with the body. The connection between underwear and hygiene became much stronger. Another important change happened in the 20th century. Clothing became simpler, lighter, and more comfortable. Heavy layers slowly disappeared from everyday life. New materials and manufacturing methods allowed companies to make underwear that was softer, more flexible, and easier to produce. Elastic materials also changed everything. Instead of clothing that simply hung around the body, underwear could stretch and fit the shape of the body more closely. This was especially important for women's underwear. For centuries, women had worn complicated garments designed to shape the body according to fashion, but during the 20th century, many women began choosing simpler and more comfortable designs. The famous corset, for example, gradually became less dominant in everyday clothing. Bras and panties developed into more familiar forms, although their designs continued to change over time. Fashion, women's changing social roles, sports, work, and ideas about comfort all influenced these changes. Men's underwear changed too. Earlier generations often wore long garments that covered much of the legs and body. But as clothing became shorter and more practical, underwear also became smaller and lighter. New styles became popular because they were easier to wear under modern trousers and other clothing. By the middle and later parts of the 20th century, underwear had become a normal part of everyday life for millions of people. And then something else happened. Underwear became a fashion industry of its own. Companies began designing underwear not only for comfort and hygiene, but also for style. Colors, patterns, logos, materials, and advertising became important. Underwear was no longer simply a hidden layer of fabric. It became a product that companies could market to different groups of people. Some brands became famous around the world because of their underwear advertising. Today, underwear comes in an enormous variety of styles. There are different materials, shapes, sizes, colors, and designs for different activities and preferences. Some people choose underwear for comfort. Others care about fashion, sports, temperature, or personal style. Modern technology has also created new materials that can stretch, breathe, dry quickly, or provide extra support. But perhaps the most interesting thing about underwear is that its history is really the history of human life. When people changed the way they worked, underwear changed. When people discovered new materials, underwear changed. When ideas about hygiene changed, underwear changed. When fashion changed, underwear changed. And when people began to care more about comfort and personal choice, underwear changed again. So the next time you get dressed in the morning, take a moment to think about the simple garment you probably never think about. It is not just a piece of clothing. It is the result of thousands of years of human invention and cultural change. From simple pieces of cloth in ancient societies to modern comfortable designs made with advanced materials, underwear has quietly followed humanity through history. And that is what makes ordinary objects so fascinating. We often look at the world around us and think everything has always been this way. But almost everything has a beginning. The shirt you wear, the shoes on your feet, the bed you sleep in, and even the underwear you put on every morning all have stories behind them. Once you start looking for those stories, everyday life suddenly becomes much more interesting.